I'm watching the Bank of England. They have a lot less gold today than they did before they shipped it all over to the US in January. And I don't know, Mario, what happens when foreign countries demand their gold back?
Well, I think I remember Venezuela demanded its gold back in 2011, and I
Still
think it was
waiting, aren't
about a
they?
hundred. No, actually, it was about 100 tons at the time, and the Bank of England actually did repatriate that. But I remember that year, gold went from like 1,400 to 1,900, and I think they had to cover a lot of leases or shorts that because these central banks they use other people's gold to rehypothecate and sell gold. That's why it took the Fed, New York Fed, 3 years to send back some gold to the Bundesbank in Germany.
I think a lot of what you're referring to is the Fed's credibility because, frankly, in any Ponzi scheme, you've got to have confidence. So with President Trump going in, and he is a change agent, like him, hate him, his job is to change the system, and he's absolutely doing that. One of the things that you're referring to is the Fed independence. And I say that with some level of hesitancy because if you go back historically, the Fed has never been completely independent. So it's a joke. And what we've seen over time is that loss of independence because the public is supposed to think that the Fed is doing everything in their power for the public's best interest. But it's not. It's to save the Fed and it's to save the private banking system. And it's really a merger of government and corporations, which is not the definition of democracy. But it's been that way since the very beginning. And something most people don't know, and I find this really interesting, and I have the hard evidence. I'm happy to send you the link, Mario. But it was corporate debt back in 1914, that was turned into Federal Reserve notes, corporate debt. And now with President Trump's signing of the Genius Act, legalizing stablecoins, what people do not understand, but they really need to, is that the monetary system has been changed, period.
Turning back to 1914, the issuance of currency was linked to corporate debt, subtly embedding private sector priorities into the public monetary system. The fusion of government, finance, and commerce was not born yesterday. As private banks and public authorities merged roles, the promise that the central bank acts solely in the public interest began to ring hollow. That historical merging is critical to understanding how modern alternatives are positioned. They claim to offer change, but may replicate older dynamics. For anyone watching the system, this suggests that change agents may still be operating within long-standing frameworks of power and influence.
And in our conversations, Mario, you remember we asked the question, well, what's going to justify the creation of this new money? And personally, everything that I'd read from the IMF, the BIS, the World Bank, et cetera, that it was either debt or purchases. And with the signage of that act, the answer is now crystal clear, and it's a combination of both. Because you have corporations, and governments can issue stablecoins too, and you're seeing a whole bunch of them do that. But in order for here in the US for corporations to issue stablecoins, they have to back them with dollars or treasury bonds. So like in the early 70s when Kissinger went to Saudi Arabia and created the petrodollar to create artificial demand for dollars, that's what this is exactly about, creating that artificial demand for dollars. Because when you, the public, go into, say, a place like Amazon, what are they going to do? They're going to nudge you to spend. And that means that your dollars will be converted into stable coins. And then that issuer, say Amazon in this particular case, has to turn around and buy the equal amount of treasuries so that these stable coins are 1-to-1. But here's the problem, and it doesn't matter whether it's US dollar stable coins or Chinese yuan stable coins or hoochie cooch stable coins, quite honestly. What are they backed with? They're backed with this garbage that's being devalued and inflated away.
In the current era, digital currencies known as stablecoins are positioned as a revolution in money. According to a 2025 working paper from the International Monetary Fund, IMF, flows of these instruments reached nearly $2 trillion in 2024, and they are especially significant in regions where traditional banking is weak. In the United States, the Genius Act mandates stablecoins be backed 1-to-1 with dollars or treasury securities. What this means: the monetary system is shifting, not simply in form but in underlying mechanics. Corporations and governments may now issue money-like instruments backed by debt or assets, implicating deep change for financial architecture.
I want to ask you something, since you were in the City of London, which is kind of the heartbeat of all of this. In all your career, have you ever heard of Wall Street touting how wonderful the devaluation trade is?
No, I haven't.
Exactly.
This is the first time.
Really? Oh, well, start listening to Bloomberg. You will hear it all over the place.
No, I've seen it. I've read about it. They call it the debasement trade, aren't they? And you mentioned the petrodollar. At least the petrodollar, that created demand for fiat dollars, but at least it was something real, oil. Stable coins is nothing, right? So you kind of wonder what they're gonna, will they back it with gold? I mean, even though I wouldn't want to give my gold in return for stable coins, I think it will fail, Lynette. Do you think it will fail as well?
Not only do I know it will fail, or I'm like 99.9% sure it's going to fail, I actually believe that that's what will usher in the hyperinflation that the governments need to repay all of that unpayable debt with currencies, fiat currencies that have zero value. So, yeah, I think it'll fail. No doubt in my mind. I think it's about bringing in that next crisis that then they can use to justify pushing us into the other system, which I'm saying no to. And I'm saying no just by positioning into physical gold and silver in my possession. Yep.
You mentioned the devaluation or debasement trade, that they're touting this a lot. What do you think it means exactly? They're just trying to warn the public they're just going to trash the currency?
I think that's exactly right, but I don't know that the public really understands what that devaluation or debasement means. It just means a lot of inflation, and then all those dollars, those new, wherever you are in the world, that fiat currency that's created, it must go someplace, and it typically goes to inflate fiat money assets. But we're also seeing it now rush into physical gold and silver. And there's a short squeeze. You know, you're in the UK.
Despite the promise of innovation, global regulators are sounding alarm bells. The Bank for International Settlements, BIS, in 2025 declared that stablecoins fail key tests of what constitutes sound money: singleness, elasticity, and integrity. They caution that these instruments may jeopardize monetary sovereignty, especially in emerging markets, and could trigger fire sales of safe assets. In short, the systems that underpin our money are being reshaped, not always quietly or safely. For consumers and citizens, these developments raise questions about what backs the money you hold, who controls its issuance, and what happens in a crisis.
I'm watching the Bank of England. They have a lot less gold today than they did before they shipped it all over to the U.S. in January. And I don't know, Mario, what happens when foreign countries demand their gold back?
Well, I think I remember Venezuela demanded its gold back in 2011. And I
Still
think it was
waiting, aren't
about
they?
100. No, actually, it was about 100 tons at the time, and the Bank of England actually did repatriate that. But I remember that year, gold went from like 1,400 to 1,900, and I think they had to cover a lot of leases or shorts that because these central banks they use other people's gold to rehypothecate and sell gold. That's why it took the Fed, New York Fed, 3 years to send back some gold to the Bundesbank in Germany.
Yeah. And I think that what we're seeing in the silver market, the short squeeze, because there's a finite amount of silver. And I guess nobody remembers 2020 when they had to change the prospectus on SLV because they couldn't find enough physical silver out there to create those baskets. So since then, or was that 2022? But it was
21,
somewhere in that
21.
21. Okay, see right
Yeah.
in the middle there. But that was already an indication that there were more silver contracts out there than could be fulfilled with the physical. But hey, as long as nobody's complaining about it, as long as everything is hunky-dory, but it's no longer hunky-dory.
Monetary policy has long relied on interest rate levers to signal prosperity or restraint. Yet low rates and abundant credit for decades have produced a bifurcated economy, booming corporate profits coexisting with stagnant wages and growing insecurity. The standard of living for many remains under pressure even as asset values soar. When new currency forms enter the scene, these inequalities may deepen. Lower rates may not mean more prosperity for most, they often mean more inflation in everyday costs. And when money erodes in value, confidence erodes too, threatening the very bedrock of a monetary system built on trust.
And
Yeah.
they've shifted it over to the U.S., and then the U.S. has delivered it out, so it's not available anymore.
Yeah, and people want the physical now, and the paper game is on its knees. Maybe we could move over to like the economy and inflation. I just saw a clip. Well, I didn't listen to it, but I read a comment about it. And Besant, the Secretary of the Treasury, apparently said that we're in the third inning of a new economic boom. You know, I'm not sure what economy he's looking at. I know that half of GDP growth in the second quarter was AI data centers. So without the AI boom, the economy would be in the doldrums. And we've seen the jobs situation deteriorate. And you recently spoke about rate cut and inflation, that the idea behind, and this is a Keynesian idea, I guess, that the more currency and credit you create, the more prosperous countries become. But that's not the case. So maybe you could explain to us why you said that recently, that rate cut doesn't necessarily mean prosperity, but it means inflation.
Yeah, 100%. And actually, everybody can probably recognize this in themselves because there was a period of time up until 97 when taking on more debt actually stimulated the economy. But in 97, that was the peak of that. And the speed at which money moves through the economy has been slowing actually pretty dramatically since then up until 2022. So between 97 and 2022, you can see that they keep cutting rates.
We stand at a crossroads. Regulators and central banks propose tokenized systems of the future, tiered ledgers uniting central bank money, bank deposits, and government bonds in programmable form. But much is unsettled. Will stablecoins succeed and reshape the system, or fail and trigger crises that drive us into something new? Some activists and investors are hedging with physical gold and silver as a wager against systemic failure. Others embrace digital money as the inevitable next step. Either way, the core questions remain: who issues money, what is it backed with, and who holds the power to redeem, regulate, and reshape it?
Cutting rates inspires more borrowing and spending, hence the debasement trade that we're talking about here. And then it makes things appear more prosperous, and they are for corporations. You look at corporate profits, they're through the roof, even through everything that we're going through right now. Corporate profits are up substantially because they are too big to fail. But the standard of living for the normal person, when you have the president of GoFundMe come on and say that there is a huge amount of funding just for people to just pay their basic necessities, and people have to break their weekly groceries into 4 easy payments, you can see that, that bifurcated economy between the haves and the have-nots. I mean, it's wider than it was in 1929 and not getting better. So if there's even more debt that comes on by lowering that interest rate, well, that means that the dollar loses that much more purchasing power, which can appear okay. I mean, things always look good until they get tested. And that's what I'm wondering now. Is this the final and ultimate test, or is this just one of the tests? Because they want to take us into that surveillance economy. And I think it's amazing. This happens to be Ethereum, a representation of Ethereum, because of course this is really Ethereum. It's just a formula. But they make it look like gold, like this 1 ounce gold coin. Got Bitcoin and whatever this is. But, there's a reason why they make this stuff look like gold. And in fact, there was just a recent report from the Federal Reserve, and on the front, they had a 1 ounce gold coin, but they had a big dollar sign on it. They want you to think that this is just like gold. This stuff, it's not. Why isn't it? One place, and they can control its value just by creating more of it.
I've got XRP silver coin.
Yeah. But is that really XRP?
No.
It may really be silver, and that's fine. But yeah, why do they make it look like gold, silver, platinum? It's perception management. That's what they want you to think of.